You're listening to the Struck Podcast. I'm Dan Blewett.
I'm Alan Hall.
And here on Struck, we talk about everything aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. All right, welcome back to the Struck Podcast. I'm your co-host, Dan Blewett. On today's episode, we have a lot of EVTOL talk, but first we'll talk a little bit about the Ingenuity helicopter finally making its first flight. A little bit about Airbus deliveries. They've outpaced Boeing for Q1 in 2021. And in our EVTOL segment, which will be most of today's show, we're going to talk about the Aska Air SUV, flying SUV, which is actually seems like a well thought out concept. We'll hear Alan's take on it. We'll talk about anti-fragility of the traditional aircraft market versus the EVTOL market. We'll hear a little bit from a senior Airbus executive, his take on the EVTOL market, and pitch book evaluations and projections of the future. So fun times there, guessing what we're going to be doing 10 years from now. We couldn't have even guessed 2 years in the past because of pandemics and other black swan events. But Alan, how you doing? How do you feel about this NASA event? Pretty cool, huh?
Well, it's exciting because, they had initial trouble when they first tried to do the takeoff, and they decided to abort it and push it back a couple of days. It sounds like it had some sort of software issue. Didn't it sound like they were rebooting the whole software system for the helicopter? That's what it sounded like. And then it took off, went basically straight up a couple of meters and came straight back down. So it was just a little blip up and a little bit down on the NASA video.
It almost looked like a Wes Anderson film. Like the way it went up and came back down, it was like, it didn't have that little hover right before you hit the ground. It just was like, doop, ba-doop, and it just like went straight back down. It was a very soft landing, but it almost felt fake the way it landed. It was very curious. I watched it a couple of times, just wondering if like the camera frame rate was a little wonky or something, but yeah, it was interesting.
Well, that's just it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, the gravity's a lot less, and the thickness of the atmosphere is a lot less. So,
well, I think that's almost to the point. Yeah, which is that the way things behave on Earth is not the way things behave on Mars. Which maybe that's exactly why it looks kind of odd to me. Just the way like things kind of slow down as they get closer to the surface. They're about to land. But this one's like, ba-doop. Anyway, that's my amateur take on it. But so successful. This is a big deal. It seems like a small deal, but it's a pretty big deal. I mean, where do you feel like they're going to go from here?
They're probably going to do a couple more short hops just to check out the system. And from there, I don't know where they're headed. Obviously, they want to start exploring the area and take some overview shots of the landing area and trying to get some description of what's going on around them. But just like with all the other previous rovers, the lifetime has been much longer than they had predicted. So when the lifetime gets longer, they start to be more adventurous with all the research crafts, whether it be a rover or, in this case, a helicopter. They're probably going to continue to expand that envelope until they can gather as much data as they possibly can. So it's going to be exciting, and it's not going to be fast. I think the kicker in all this is these projects, once they get on the planet, seem to take a long time before you actually see any data. And the reason is they're going incredibly slow because they only have one asset, and if they lose it, it's over. Mm-hmm. So they want to be, in particularly, very careful about what kind of mission they're going to run and where they're going to go. And that, in terms of the general public, before we see any data, it could be a solid year or more before we see anything that's really cool.
Well, hopefully at some point DoorDash can bring, a McDonald's quarter pounder, over the... don't they have like a massive mountain? I don't know what it's called. Is it like Mount Olympus or something on Mars? But yeah, I love drones, door dashing, to your bubble on the other side of the red planet. So look forward to that.
Well, is this finally going to overtake the whole comment? If we can put a man on the moon, then why can't I? Blah, blah, blah. Is it going to be now I can fly a helicopter on Mars? Why can't I get DoorDash helicopter to me? Is that the new one?
That's right? It's a good question. But that... Gosh, that still holds true. There's so many things about 2021 that have been very baffling and frustrating, like just like vaccine registration portals on the web. Like we couldn't figure those out in DC, despite putting men on the moon, 40 years ago. There was another one recently that was just like baffling me. I can't remember what it was, but we have some very high tech things the human race does, and yet there's still lots of little things we fall short of. But
well, yeah.
I guess that's progress. It's slow, 2 steps, 11 steps forward, 1 step back sometimes.
Right.
So we've talked about Boeing a bunch recently, how they're recovering. It also seems like Airbus is doing much better now. They've actually outpaced Boeing with deliveries in Q1 for 2021. That Airbus has delivered 125 aircraft compared to Boeing 77. So, I mean, what do you feel like the difference is here, Alan? I mean, is it just they have some, I mean, the A320neo, which I flew on last month, seems like a great aircraft. I mean, what's Boeing, what's Airbus doing that maybe Boeing isn't?
I think Boeing's still trying to ramp up after the 737 and 787 issues. They're still trying to get back rolling. And I read recently that Boeing airlines are taking some of the 737 Maxes without even putting them into service.
Putting them in storage.
Well, that's unusual because you usually don't want to take control of an asset because it starts the clock on payments for that asset. Particularly something as expensive as an aircraft, airlines don't particularly like to have aircraft on the ground. They can avoid it. But there must be some sort of special arrangement between the airlines and Boeing, or Boeing saying, please take the aircraft. We're going to call it a sale. You don't have to start paying us until you fly it. It's probably what the deal is. So Boeing's trying other ways to get more aircraft moving because I think, remember the parking lot at Boeing is all full of airplanes, 737s, because they kept producing 737s during the pandemic and with all the MAX issues. So my guess is they're trying to clear out the parking lots up in Seattle. In the meantime, Airbus is always had orders and it just continues to kind of chuck along. There is concerns with Airbus because of the extended pandemic and the vaccine. There's concerns in Europe about how fast the vaccines are getting appropriated out in Europe, and it's not going as well as some other places in the world. So there's concern about travel, and I think it was France that said they were going to open up to tourists from certain countries, which is great for Airbus because a lot of those airplanes are Airbus airplanes. But if that doesn't click, then Airbus could be in for a little bit of a long run, and Boeing's been in it longer than Airbus. But I think both companies are really concerned about overhead and employment and what they're going to do over the next 6 months. So, it's going to be hard to say. I know in the United States, the upside for Boeing, because Southwest is a large customer, I recently flew Southwest and it was busy, really busy. The airports are busy. I would say 70-75% of normal. And for Southwest, that means still really busy. Yeah. It was pretty busy. So from a Boeing standpoint in Southwest, it looks like Southwest activities are picking up, which is good for Boeing. Europe needs to get the vaccine out and get shots in arms. And I think Airbus will be just fine. But that's going to be the big driver.
Yeah, well, and this is another thing that kind of ties into this. You wonder what effect this, the do not travel list that the U.S. pushed out yesterday, putting essentially 80% of countries will carry the do not travel label, which is like their level 4 risk warning. So, right. The State Department putting that out there, I mean, is that really going to deter people? I mean, does that change the way people feel about the risk at the moment? I mean, just because the State Department says don't go to Mexico, I mean, if you're already planning on going to Mexico, does that really change it for you? I don't know.
It has in the past, but obviously in the past it's been more about kidnappings, terrorism, those sort of things, not getting
COVID.
A flu.
Yeah. When I went to Turkey a couple years ago, doing some baseball instruction, it was, Turkey as a whole was a do not travel, level 4. Of course, right. Some of the bigger cities like Istanbul are not, necessarily that risky, but you have to be smart about it, right? But this is completely different than that. This is just, we don't want you to get COVID. I mean, is that the main thing here?
I think that it is, but you're getting two mixed messages in the United States right now. The first message is everybody should go out and get vaccinated, and they're trying to make that, the government's trying to make that possible. All the states are working really hard to get everybody vaccinated. On the second hand, they're saying, well, even if you're vaccinated, it doesn't matter. You may contract the virus and spread the virus. So what's the point of getting the vaccine? So there's those mixed messages. That's got to get cleared up pretty fast, and I'm surprised that the airlines and the industry, aircraft industry, is not pushing to clarify that, because typically after you have a vaccine, it's taken its gestation time, and you have the immunity buildup in your system. You no longer worry about one, contracting, or two, spreading. So there's going to be a pushback in the United States about not traveling, in my opinion.
All right, so we're going to transition here to our EVTOL segment. First on the docket is the Aska flying SUV, is sort of what it's being touted as. And this is a great article from robreport.com. And they are targeting this vehicle at $789,000. And basically the premise here is that this is something that you'll have in your backyard, fly you into the city, take you to work. But Alan, this one, I think what sticks out in contrast with many of the EVTOL companies when they announce their new aircraft is that this one seems thought out from the standpoint that they're not super bought into only, or not, dug into only one form of power, right? They have a gas backup in the car, in the aircraft, so they're not, solely going to be battery powered. They have some redundancy there, and sure. It just seems like it could potentially work, at least on paper. But what do you feel about the price point? Because I know you have some strong feelings about the price point of these aircraft in general, and how that's going to impact their viability.
Well, being under $1 million is a big price point differential between everything else we've been seeing, because their price points have been in the couple $1 million range, up to $4 or $5 million a pop. Mm-hmm. So to be under that $1 million price point is big. The question is, how are you going to accomplish it? Because it's a little harder to do that, especially on a new aircraft, because when you start thinking about the staff and the infrastructure and the materials and everything else and tooling, supply chain, it's hard to produce a new aircraft at that price point. But maybe they have a couple of things figured out. We're going to wait and see on that. But it has the right concept, right? The lower the price point, the more people that can potentially purchase it or have a mortgage on it or lease it, and which will get more of an amount there. That's you got to play that price point issue, because you see this supply demand curve is going to change with that price point. And so far, no one's been talking about the price point of the aircraft. But in this one, we've seen it straight out. And they're taking deposits. I think it was like $5,000 for a deposit. And I always think $5,000. Like, is that really a deposit? And $100,000, that's a deposit. Like, that's serious money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or are they refundable, non-refundable? Like, a lot of the bigger ones have been refundable for a long time in case the aircraft company goes belly up. But it's good to see. And then the concept is pretty cool, because it's not a vertical takeoff. It's a short takeoff and landing, which is much more up the alley of doable and for a lot less money.
Yeah.
So
I wonder if that really tiny deposit, because you're right, it's a nothing price. I wonder if that tiny deposit is just to get people from, I feel like their target is kind of like a Silicon Valley executive, who's got some money.
Yeah.
And if you could afford an $800,000 aircraft, $5,000 deposit is like a $20 bill, right? So they're like, hey, yeah, I'll throw $5,000 down, and now you've got them in. It's almost just like giving your email address on a website. If you ask for something very, very small, now they're in. Now maybe they invest in the company. Now maybe they're telling way more people. They're just, it's probably not about the money. Like, it's got to be a completely non-factor amount of money, right? They sold 100 of these. It's only $500,000. So maybe it's just to get people into it and feel like they've committed something. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just that sort of first article of persuasion. If you get somebody to physically do something on your behalf, now you have some. Yeah. You have some, not necessarily control, but you have some influence of what happens next, right? Now you build that little family network, because the act of writing that check, even though it's relatively small comparison, is a commitment, and you will most likely follow up on that commitment. So the trick is that when the price of the aircraft rises, how many people are going to stay? Well, if you've already committed to it and you feel like you're already part of that network and
Mm-hmm.
it goes from 800,000 to 1.2 million, are you going to stay? I think the answer is a lot of people will stay because they feel like they're connected to it and they already made a commitment to it. It's a persuasion technique.
Yeah.
It's what it is.
It's just like those, because sometimes you wonder, because most companies have a software thing, like they'll have a free trial, right? A week, 2 weeks, month,
Right.
whatever. But some of them have a $1 trial. So you get $1 or $7. Like, I think one of them that we use is like a $7 for the first week. And then it's like 150 a month after that. You're like, why even bother with the $7? Why even bother with the $1 free, trial? It's just that same thing. It's just to get you in there a little bit where you feel like you've committed more. And I imagine the conversion rates, people sticking around, like you said, are way higher for the $1 free trial, even though it's only a $1 difference versus the free trial, right? They've got some skin in the game.
Well, yeah, it makes you feel like you made a commitment to it. And it feels like you made a decision, a positive decision towards an aircraft in this case. And if you back away from it, you're sort of admitting you made a mistake, as weird as that sounds like, and people are reluctant to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are reluctant to do that.
Yeah. So the other thing that sticks out here, though, is this is something that you're going to pilot yourself. And it says that they include pilot certification training, I guess, in the purchase price of the Aska. But I mean, how do you feel about that, Alan? I mean, it feels like all these other companies, you're going to be a passenger in these air taxis, right? If you fly with Joby or someone else, you're going to arrive at the helipad or vertiport, whatever we're calling it, and then you're going to be a passenger start to finish, right? But here, this is your vehicle. You get in it. You fly the aircraft, and I mean, that's a big change, isn't it?
It is, because most of the other eVTOL companies are talking about essentially having professional pilots, running them all the time. Yeah, so to go to a owner pilot model is a little bit different, and I think there's obviously the hurdle is going to be training and what kind of training is going to be needed to do that, because it's such a different variety of aircraft. Who's going to train you besides the company that manufactures it? That's the only people who can train you. Unlike like a Cessna 172, there's hundreds of instructors out there who could train you on how to fly that aircraft. But in this case, they'll have to train you directly, and that's going to be a little bit of an impediment based on these guys being in California. If you want to go buy an aircraft and you're out in New York and you got to travel to California most likely for a couple of weeks to learn how to fly this thing before you come back. So it's not only the price of the aircraft, it's sort of your time commitment to learn how to fly it.
Well, and we've talked at length before about just how devastating an eVTOL crash would be as this industry tries to get off the ground.
Sure.
And I'm sure that almost everyone who flies their own plane. So if you own a Cessna or whatever, like no one, I don't think takes flying lightly. But there was a celebrity, who they found when he crashed, he had a significant amount of opioids in his system. This is a late baseball player from a couple of years ago. And you wonder with this, if you're suddenly putting these easy to operate aircraft, I assume they're going to be easy to operate, in the hands of anyone. Does that run a risk as a company and for the industry? Like, hey, if sure. Joe has a couple drinks and he's like, oh, it's just like push button, it's really easy to fly, I can get in there, I just had 2 beers, I can jump in mine, be in San Francisco in 25 minutes, and then that goes down. I mean, that's a disaster, obviously, no matter what. But
it is.
You wonder if that's a scenario that if you make these too easy, just like with the Tesla, if you're to be driving in yourself, fully automatic car or autonomous car, and you fall asleep because you feel like you can, or you could be drunk because you feel like you could, which again wouldn't be anything the manufacturer ever recommends, obviously. But
no,
you wonder what the what the fallout comes from that.
Yeah, and because of the multiple engines set up and the advanced avionics and the fact that we've gotten a lot smarter and about basically auto flying the airplane or auto landing the aircraft, I wonder if that's going to be like in my Honda even that I have. I mean, the Honda knows when you're touching the steering wheel. So if you're at any point in some sort of auto mode with that CRV, which is what it is, if you take your hand off the steering wheel, it starts beeping at you. And I would imagine if they're smart in the design of the aircraft, they're going to do very similar things. If you do something really stupid, I wonder if it's going to start taking over and say, okay, we're not going to let you do that. Right?
Yeah.
You're flying too close to this structure, or you're going too fast, you're going too slow. Is it going to be limited in the fact that what you can and can't do with it? And would it just find a place to land and land itself, whether you want to or not? It may, from a risk liability standpoint, it may make sense to do that to these aircraft because of the number of new, quote unquote, new pilots that are going to be with them. It may make sense to design it as systems where you can't crash it. That's, I think that's more likely than not right now.
So moving on, the CEO or a senior Airbus executive for the helicopter arm of Airbus, Roman Trapp, has expressed some skepticism over the eVTOL market. He said it could be decades before eVTOL aircraft are integrated into an advanced air mobility environment. That's reporting from AIN Online. That the technology is not there. The regulatory environment still is undefined. And safety is going to be obviously a huge part of what gets this whole ecosystem launched. With him being, obviously running this whole helicopter business, which is so similar, right? Just different,
right?
Commercialization, but all of like the main safety aspects and the ecosystem very similar.
Right.
I mean, is this going to start to wake people up as more and more invest in SPACs and these companies are raising money? I mean, I feel like we need people speaking out and being the dissenting opinion, right? Everyone's really excited, which is great. And you want to see the technology push, what humans can do to new limits, but
sure,
we need dissenting opinions. And this seems to certainly be one from a very credible source. I mean, how do you feel about his sentiments on the future?
Well, I think they're Airbus and all the helicopter manufacturers today are coming from a unique place in that helicopters tend to be those sort of pickup trucks of the sky. They tend to do a variety of heavy lift tasks or very difficult tasks. It's not just carrying passengers from A to B, and that's probably the least of the things that they do. There's a lot in law enforcement, right, with a bunch of special equipment on them. There's a number of helicopters that are in emergency services, air ambulances. That's a unique thing. There's the helicopters to take the workers out to the oil rigs and back. There are the helicopters that do a lot of the heavy lifting and carrying large amounts of whatever, heavy items on a hoist from A to B. Those are those sort of work environments that helicopters get used in, and the eVTOL world really can't do any of those things because the weight's going to be too heavy, the demand on power is going to be too much, and they can't perform those functions. And so from an Airbus perspective, or from Bell Helicopter or Leonardo, those kind of companies, they're not, they don't see a potential marketplace in the Uber like environment.
Mm-hmm.
They're selling really versatile work vehicles. That's what they're selling. And so they don't think there's that big of a marketplace. But when the eVTOLs get to be air ambulances, right, that's when that idea will start to shift, and then the Airbuses of the world will start to get more involved in it because they know that space. One, they know the customers. Two, they know all the intricacies of it, and three, they have the infrastructure to deal with it and to make conversions to go to electric. So from an Airbus perspective, I don't think they're too worried about it. When the time comes, I think they'll be ready.
Well, and speaking of the future, interesting projection analysis from PitchBook about the eVTOL air taxi startup market, and essentially they're projecting that the market will grow from 1.5 billion in revenue in 2025, which seems like an accurate, like modest start, to 150.9 billion by 2035. So, Alan, we've talked. You're shaking your head. We've talked before about projecting 10 years into the future. I mean, if this was 2018 and you're projecting anything even 3 years ahead, it would all be just garbage by this point, thanks to the COVID pandemic. I mean, there's so many unforeseen things can happen, and these projections, though they do say, hey, here's some things that could impact it long term, such as competition for batteries, vehicle configurations, utilization things, certification hurdles. But even then, there's so many potential issues.
So the PitchBook numbers on the growth of the eVTOL market are about as valuable as the paper they're written on. It's very hard to predict that market. And I think in terms of a company, if you're running one of those companies, obviously you like those projections because you can take that to your investors and show what a great market you're in, which is fantastic, right? I mean, that's how you raise money. You need some rosy projections to leverage. The issue really comes about from an aircraft company perspective is roughly every 7 years is some sort of economic downturn. So you want to try to navigate that roller coaster that is the U.S./world economy. And so the companies that seem to do well are the companies that are always hedging their bets and sort of playing it a little bit on the safe side, because a 2-year economic downturn will wipe you out. And it's killed a lot of aircraft companies over the years. So historically, they've designed their companies to be resilient. And what I mean by is that if they had a 25% reduction in output or 50% reduction in output, they still can make money on each aircraft and keep the production line running. Yeah. You don't need to sell 1,000 aircraft to be productive. You need to be able to sell 50 aircraft and make some money and be happy with it. If you sell 100, that's great. If you sell 1,000, obviously you're just rolling in the money. But a lot of aircraft companies that get too leveraged and can't handle that first economic downturn, because it typically takes 4 to 5 years to get through initial design into type certificate for an airplane. If in the middle of that, somewhere beginning, middle, or end, there's some sort of economic downturn, it just wipes out airplanes. Just wipes out designs, wipes out companies. So you have to build that into your system. And I'm not sure, watching some of this, I'm not sure that's built into some of these companies. You won't be able to take that downturn. No matter how rosy the PitchBook predictions are, real world hits you. And that's why, if you're looking a year out, that's about as far as you can do, honestly, in the aircraft market.
Well, their market size graph is just like laughably they added $20 billion a year, like every 2 years. Like it's
like
just a
Tesla stock.
Perfect line. It's like, in what world is that? I mean, in 2035, battery technology might be incredible. There might be hydrogen. There might be all these crazy new things. That are just already, sure. Like we have no idea what's going to happen. There could also be a major mining issue. Like cobalt is already becoming more scarce. Like the cobalt mining industry is difficult.
Right.
And it's not just EVTOLs that need batteries. It's potentially millions and millions of cars. Millions of little scooters and electric bikes. Battery demand is going to be intense just in the next couple of years.
Yes,
you're going to see the amount of cars, like it's not going to be a linear, increase in the amount of electric cars on the road. It's going to be an explosion just in the next couple of years, because GM's coming out with their own platform, Volkswagen. Every auto manufacturer is going to have 10 different cars you can buy that are actually pretty solid cars now, right? So. Does that mean battery prices skyrocket? Does that mean battery technology really takes off and everything? There just could be an incredible amount of variability about where that goes, not to mention reconfiguration of cities, another potential pandemic. Just the way people are traveling is changing, and we're not going to know the fallout of that for another couple of years, right? Like, are people leaving the cities for good? Is commuting changing? Does work from home completely reduce a lot of the demand for travel into cities? I don't know. There's lots of questions.
Yeah, and I think from the engineering perspective on it, and I've bounced on this a couple of times lately, so it's just rattled inside my head, which is from the design engineer's perspective on these companies. eVTOL, regular airplane company, don't really care. It's the same sort of issue. There is a decided separation in, I think, a number of engineers' minds between the job and the company. The success of the company doesn't necessarily matter too much. as much as getting the little engineering tasks done. And I think in these eVTOL companies, you got to be super careful about that, because there are people in this world and I get it. I mean, if you're working for a large aircraft company, you typically fall into that mode of they're never going anywhere. What do I have to worry about? I do my job, I check the boxes, I do what's required of me, and I get a paycheck every Friday. That's how it works.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is on these small aircraft companies, those decisions you make have a financial impact on the health of the company. And until you meld those two together and realize, yeah, I can check the box, but if it doesn't produce a valuable aircraft to a potential customer, then it doesn't matter. And so there's a lot of variables. And I wonder if this is part of the issue about the Wichita thing, where a lot of these eVTOL companies are not being based in Kansas or near existing aircraft companies down in Georgia where Gulfstream is, or pick them near Seattle or in Oregon. Is it because the engineers are just too set in their ways and they don't really care about the health of the aircraft company, and so they're deciding to pick up non-aerospace people, roughly, or younger people that don't have any experience in that industry to push their aircraft company forward? There is a weird dynamic that's going on right now that the existing aircraft infrastructure is not being tapped for a lot of the eVTOL employment. It's curious. And I haven't put my finger on it yet, but I think over the next couple of months, we'll get a better feel for it so we can see what's happening. But I do think the success and failure of these companies doesn't necessarily lie in the investment room. A lot of it lies on the ability of the engineers to deliver a quality product at a good cost.
All right, well, that'll do it for today's episode of Struck. If you're new to the show, thank you so much for listening, and please leave a review and subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out the WeatherGuard Lightning Tech YouTube channel for video episodes, full interviews, and short clips from the show. And follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Our handle is @WGLightning. Tune in next Tuesday for another great episode on aviation, aerospace engineering, and lightning protection. Strike Tape, WeatherGuard Lightning Tech's proprietary lightning protection for radomes, provides unmatched durability for years to come. If you need help with your radome lightning protection, reach out to us at weatherguardaero.com. That's weatherguardaero.com.